listening to the Subrogation Support Network, a podcast from Mattison, Wickert & Layer, America's subrogation law firm, with dissemination of new developments and changes in subrogation law, as well as emerging trends and best practices. Here's your host, Ashton Kirsch.
Hello, everybody. This is Ashton Kirsch, your host for today's episode of the Subrogation Support Network podcast. This is another collaboration episode. I like to say it's working with collaborators, not competitors, even though I'm with just another great attorney. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Aaron Jacobs. Aaron's a partner with Butler, Weinmuller, Katz & Craig, another subrogation law firm. Aaron, how you doing today?
Great, Ashton. Thanks so much for having me.
Beautiful. Well, Aaron, tell me a bit about yourself. Just for the sake of both of our audiences, I want to give us a chance to have you tell us about you for my audience, and I'll talk about myself, which is pretty easy for me, to yours. And then from there, a bit about our podcast, and let's talk about some good collaborating content. So go ahead, Aaron, tell me about yourself.
Yeah, so I've been with the firm here at Butler for about 16 years. I'm a partner in the Tampa office in the subrogation large loss recovery unit here. Pretty much have done, as you have, a lot of the presenting for the various professional organizations. Been doing the podcast, Subro Sense, here at Butler for about 4 or 5 years. We started just a little after COVID, and just enjoyed the platform. And when you came to us with the idea of this collaboration and discussing subrogation together, I thought what an awesome idea and opportunity. Because that's really the new landscape, I think, to some degree of our subrogation practice. So excited to talk to you today, excited for both audience to get acquainted with one another, and then to just chat about how we as subrogation attorneys have worked together and will continue to work together moving forward.
Thanks, Aaron. So on my end, I created Subrogation Support Network podcast really because, our firm, it's just like yours. I mean, we really have a focus on education for our clients. Obviously, one, there's a marketing component, but two, it's to make our clients' life easier. It's also, frankly, and selfishly speaking, so when I get a case and it's ready for litigation, I know that the case has been worked up right. So I built this podcast. It started actually as a LinkedIn group where I created the Subrogation Support Network group through MDLs. And it kind of grew from there, where we ended up having 500 and then 800 and then about 1,000 members asking questions, commenting. And at one point I realized, we're doing all these webinars through our firm. We have all these firm webinars where we have hundreds, if not thousands of people attend. So why not start getting some more content out there for those of us just driving in the car to work? I have an hour and 20-minute commute because I'm a crazy person. And I listen to all kinds of podcasts, usually listen at 2 to 3 times normal speed. Like, well, why don't other people get the chance to listen to me at 3 times normal speed? So it's kind of the background there. A bit about myself. Subrogation attorney. I've been doing it for over a decade. I am a shareholder partner over at Mattison, Wickert & Layer, MWL. Many of you on both podcasts, I'm sure, have used our charts and resources before. Great website. I manage our large loss property and commercial auto practice group, have for many years. Live up in Wisconsin, so the north of the Cheddar Curtain, the people in Illinois like to say, the land of beer and cheese. Great place to be, not in the winter. I'd like to come down by you, Aaron, at that time. But really, that's me. I love subrogation. I have a fascination with subrogation, negotiations, and, both of our podcasts are hugely important, in my opinion, because it helps the audience get to know, obviously, some concepts, but from an attorney's perspective. It's a perspective that is not really discussed as much as you'd like within the carrier. But obviously we talk about everything. I've listened to your podcast. It's excellent. You're a great presenter. But on my podcast, we talk a bit about, last episode was with the claims manager from Red Bull. We talked about actually how I've been trying to push them to let me skydive into NASP and be sponsored by Red Bull. We talked to Karen Sieber with Gallagher Bassett to talk about some motivational things and talk about, being in a career with subrogation. We also talk about things as obscure as misdig claims and how to pursue claims against contractors for digging into utility lines. I love the stuff. We have all kinds of different topics, but this one today I think is great. I love the collaboration where we can talk about how we work together, even though we're with different firms, different competing firms, how we collaborate One, just in the industry, which this is exactly what we're doing today. We're creating content together to help benefit the industry as a whole. We're promoting subrogation. But also together, we'll talk a bit about kind of market share claims, mass tort claims. Where do we attorneys with competing firms, collaborating firms, get to work together? But I think just the importance of subrogation is such a huge factor. Now, Aaron, I know that on your podcast, I was listening to one episode about subrogation and bringing claims against, was it golf cart manufacturers or golf cart claims?
Yeah,
I love that one.
We did. Yeah, we did one recently with Rimkus and on golf cart fires. Obviously, being down here in Florida, we have lots of golf courses. We've got a large growing number of planned communities with planned golf paths where, residents take great joy in taking their golf carts out on the weekends and not having to drive their cars. So a large increase in the use of golf carts. So thought that would be something fun to have. We've obviously, with that increase of golf carts here, we've seen a huge increase in the amount of golf cart fires as well. So fun topic. And, but yeah, I agree. It's doing these podcasts is a new way to get information out to colleagues and clients, and just, like you said, just find new channels to share information and how to develop these claims, how to pursue these claims. So I couldn't agree with you more there.
In way to go on making me now afraid of golf carts. It was my one pastime that I get to relax away from all the kiddos. And now I'm afraid that it's going to start on fire. That's this fascinating thing about those of us, is probably everyone listening, has some interplay with subrogation. Is I do a lot of product liability work. I believe you do as well. I'm afraid of everything in my house now. I'm always afraid that, my toaster is going to start my house on fire. My water heater is going to have the anode rod fail. And next thing you know, water loss or fire. Do you have the same fears day to day where you have, instead of nightmares about, a monster under your bed, it's nightmares about the dehumidifier?
Right.
The fire.
The pinched extension cord, or power cord, I should say, or the lithium ion battery explosion, arcing in wiring. Yeah, I think initially it was a lot worse. And then I've kind of, I think try to learn how to tune it out over the years. But I had a paralegal start with me a few years ago, and he commented the same thing, the same effect. He says, ever since I got into working with you on these claims, I can never look at things in my house the same way. I developed this new layer of anxiety in my relationship with the world that I never had before. And I just learned, or I think I try just to probably tune it out, because it's maddening. You can look at everything, the world around you. As we speak now, there's probably, I can look out my window and see 5 cranes building in downtown Tampa. And you just think about the crane losses, the crane collapses. Or as I'm looking at, as they put up the parking decks and whatnot in the new buildings, you just can think about all the claims with rebar and sprinkler systems that are going into those units, or plumbing that could fail. And this practice has certainly changed the way I view the world, for sure.
And let's not even forget about sinkholes down there. I mean, are you kidding me? I've spent part of the year in Florida, Aaron, and just you have to be walking around, next thing you know, the ground caves in. Beautiful in Florida. Well, also, just because we're friends, and then we'll get into some of the meat of it, just because we're friends and the audience, we're all close together on this, I'll disclose something that's relatively embarrassing. For the last probably 6 months, every night before I go to bed, I have 2 ranges and ovens in my house. I do look at both of them to make sure that the switches are off, because we're dealing with a ton of inadvertent, basically start claims. Inadvertent ignition is what they call it. And it's a scary world we're in, man. I didn't expect that to be our, the gist of our conversation. But, for those of you out there, understand we're going to be okay. Our house is likely not going to light on fire from the hoverboard in the garage, but it could, so be safe. But enough of that stuff. Let's talk a bit about collaborating amongst firms. I think it's kind of a fascinating thing. And it's something that I think a lot of those out there, a lot of our clients, the carriers, the self-insureds, don't necessarily understand. It's kind of our need to work together, right? It's those cases where, be it mass tort, multi-district litigation, or market share claims, that I think that we need to really have this good relationship, right? It's not an adversarial competition. It's kind of a collaborating togetherness in a way. Do you kind of see the same thing?
Absolutely. And that's just not me, speaking personally. That I can tell you is just the way we've always approached it as a firm. And whether it be Hobie Hind, Matt Perry, or any of the folks in our firm, we've always, and as we start to see this more and more with the market share claims on these commercial risks, and as market shares really became way more prevalent, I think, in the last 10 to 15 years. I like I said, I've been doing this just 16 years now. And in just that time, I have seen an incredible amount of growth in the amount of how these risks are shared amongst various carriers. And whether that's, domestic-based carriers, London-based carriers, Bermuda-based carriers, we're seeing them from all over the world. And because of that, they get assigned to various firms. When I first started, it would be usually one of the carriers in the market would get the claim, assign it out, and then mostly, for the majority of times, the rest of the market would just join and follow, whether it be the lead or just the first carrier that appointed Subro counsel.
Now, for the sake of the audience, Aaron, could you briefly just put that professor hat on and explain, when we speak about market share, what are we talking about? And I only say that because we do have a lot of work comp Subro people and a lot of those that are only handling auto. So I think it's important that people understand kind of what we're referring to when we say market share.
Yeah, that's a great point. So market share is, especially in the property world, and specifically commercial and industrial property insurance, where, and I'm not on the underwriting side or the sales side of these things, but what I do know is that that ultimately these programs, I believe it's, by the brokers, will go out and obtain, one carrier will take on 10% of the risk. Another carrier will take on 20. Another carrier may take on 40. And so these policies, they all kind of follow usually a lead policy. And that's how they get some of these larger commercial industrial insured by, where they kind of spread the risk amongst a handful of carriers. And again, I'm not on the underwriting or sales side, but my understanding and what we see is that has become more and more commonplace in the market. And I think the concept goes probably back to some degree to Lloyd's of London and how they had slips and different carriers would subscribe to the slips in different percentages in the London market. And I think where that same concept kind of applies here, where it may not be a slip per se, but it's brokers going out into the open market and aggregating a handful of carriers to basically insure a particular insured. So does that kind of, do you think that, feel free to add on to it too. I just,
you could be teaching a law school class. It was wonderful, Aaron. It was very good. I mean, yeah, because I think the important thing to note is it comes in all shapes and sizes, just with everything. I mean, we talk about market share, sometimes you refer to as even just the relationship between when we have a prorated share between insured under a JPA and also the carrier. But usually we're talking about, like you're saying, basically broker goes out, they kind of find ways to insure this risk, divvy up the risk, allocate it so that it's not as risky for one specific carrier. And then you could have percentages with, lead it, whatever percentage and all the others and any number of other carriers that percentage is below that, right? Lesser shares. And I think it's the interplay is kind of fascinating between, we all hope to get the referral of the lead, but that doesn't always happen, right? Sometimes we're sitting back there. We have some claims with our firm where we're lead, others where we're sitting back there, the fifth in line with a very tiny little stake. But when we're dealing with a significant loss, a 5% stake could be hundreds of thousands or even millions of dollars.
Right. And that I think highlights, and that's kind of the approach we take, is sometimes you are going to be the lead and sometimes you're not. And if we all work collectively together and we understand that sometimes I'm going to be doing the heavy lifting and I'm going to be taking the lead in this, and I may have 45, 50, 60% of the market, you may only have 5, but the next time it's going to be vice versa. And so I think that's where the collaboration and the trust we really do have amongst us, and it's a collegial practice on the subrogation side, which is what I love with the firms and the attorneys. And we're able to take this context, work together and move these claims forward, together. And it's really been a process in learning that. Again, as this has become more commonplace, like I was referring to earlier, it used to be just that one firm would kind of jump in, everyone would follow, and there you go. And about 5, 6 years ago, I don't know exactly when it was, you started to see carriers kind of say, no, I want to assign my own counsel, or I already kicked this over to so-and-so. And so our approach has become a little bit different. So now when we get a claim and we have, let's say, a carrier that has 20%, one of my first calls is to the independent adjuster that's assigned and say, hey, is there any other firms assigned to this claim? And he'll say, yeah, Ashton with MWO has so-and-so on it. And so my next call after reaching out to that IA is to contact you and find out where are you at with this, and what can I do? And have we assigned an expert, and coming up with kind of a developed plan collectively. And sometimes I have some of these market share cases where we have as much as 4 or 5 Subro attorneys on the same market. So in some contexts, it becomes another step that we have to do. But when you think about it, we now have the resources, not just of one firm, but multiple firms. And I may think of something you didn't think of, and you may think of something I didn't think of. And we can work together to really handle these cases in a very different but beneficial manner.
Absolutely. And it's almost taking the shape of what, we do a lot of mass torts work, be it class actions or MDLs, right? I mean, we're actively involved in the earthquakes, the wildfires, Texas freeze, which didn't turn where we wanted to go, flood claims. A lot of this stuff, we're taking some of those, lessons learned, right, on how to formulate kind of a leadership group and a leadership committee and work together and collaborate to kind of get to the right point, right? Where are we going? We're going to create the biggest pie so that it can be split up appropriately. And the right way to do that is to work together. It's to have those conference calls. It's to coordinate. It's to make sure we're choosing the right experts. I've had a number where I'm suing, we have some Tesla fires that have caused some pretty significant damages. Okay, well, next thing you know, we come in, we have a very well-known firm that's working with us and actually in lead. And next thing you know, we're making clear, hey, I have an expert I have 24 of these in suit right now. This is the right person to use. And they're ecstatic, right? They're very happy. And it's the same way around. It's be it expert retention, being, strategies to work with our insured on this, whatever it could be. I think that it's an excellent way to collaborate, work together. I mean, I don't know if you've dealt with this, but I've had a number of cases, primarily London market, where next thing you know, you're hoping, crossing your fingers, we get on it quick. We know there's a lead that's going to jump in. We find out it's, so-and-so firm. We're hoping it's one of the Subro names that we recognize and we like to work with. We find out it's, some California firm that, is not easy to work with. The next thing you know, it's like pulling teeth just to get updates. And we want to work. We need to pursue our claim. But, they're thinking, oh, well, we have the majority exposure. So we're just going to, we're going to run with it. And you guys just sit in the background. And I feel like that happens sometimes, but it's happening less and less. So you kind of seeing the same things that everyone's kind of getting on board, that we all need to work together, collaborate to get this done for our clients?
I feel fairly lucky. I just see kind of the same on the market share case, which I primarily deal with. Although I've been a handful of the large tort claims, structural collapse claims, and things of those natures as well. Some of my partners have been involved in the freeze claims and the wildfire claims. But on the market share stuff, it tends to be just a group of about 10 firms that we just see time and time again. And I think at the beginning, you're right. I think it was maybe a learning curve for all of us to some degree on that. Whereas, in the mass tort claims, especially in the wildfire, which is kind of that stereotypical mass tort type claim, where a lot of the attorneys that work on those cases start seeing each other again and again, whether that be California or Oklahoma or Hawaii. And they developed that kind of those routines and understandings of how to work together and work together effectively. I think there was probably on the market share stuff a little bit. Obviously, the claims aren't that big because you're dealing with one specific claim as opposed to in a mass tort claim. You've got, hundreds of thousands of claims. But yeah, I do think there was a learning curve, but I think everyone has kind of settled into a nice pattern of working together and kind of understanding when to do the heavy lifting or when to defer and when to kind of seek guidance from others. But yeah, I'd say by and large, feel very fortunate that we are working, I'd say, with the same 10 firms that seem to at least kind of land at the same place you and I are at, which is, man, we're a lot more effective working together than trying to work against one another. And I think, again, the industry, the subrogation, our carriers collectively, our clients aren't a better place for it.
Absolutely. And when the attorneys can get along, that makes life better. I think probably the biggest pinch point on these claims and the things that create the most difficulty for us on a practical level, of course, not talking about the merits of the case, is kind of when you have different kind of risk exposures, risk appetites, or kind of litigation preferences for the different carriers, right? As I'm sure you know, Aaron, I have some of my clients, hey, if you can give me 100% and we're going to litigate it for 3 years, that's what we want. We want to fight. And to be honest with you, that's the best because most clients don't want to try cases anymore. We love the chance to try some cases. We have other clients where it's, listen, if you can get me 80% today, I'd rather take 80% today than wait 2-3 years for trial. And other carriers are like, hey, get me whatever you can now. We don't even want to go through litigation, or we don't want to deal with the expense exposure or the high cost experts. So when you have different carriers that have different perspectives, that's kind of where, this collaboration is so important because we need to work together to find those solutions. Have you seen that to be an issue on any claims you've handled, or what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I do think that sometimes there's been some differing perspectives, especially at the threshold of litigation and what cases are, warrant those additional expenses and efforts versus those that don't. So it's what I think what we've done and we found to be effective is roundtabling it first with the other attorneys on the case, collectively discussing the good, the bad, the ugly, and then coming up with a joint game plan of what we all collectively have landed on would be the best course for the case. Take that back to the clients, say, here are the options. This is where we are at. We've discussed with co-counsel and collectively as a group, we have decided that we think this might be the best course. But again, highlighting for the client the options. But what I have seen is if you do roundtable with representatives, the council, the other market members, and come back and have that discussion with them, I think by and large, the clients understand that they too have to they too are in a collaborative scenario. They were in a collaborative scenario from the get-go when they joined on to a shared risk in a market share case. And now they have to continue down the path. Now, with the mass tort claims where it's a little bit different because the carriers are still more in independent control of their fates there. They're not quite as tight at the hip, so to speak. That can be very different. I mean, I've been in some structural collapse claims where we've had various carriers involved, and some have more of an appetite for jumping into those claims than others. The beautiful part about that is that the ones that want to go and pursue those claims have the option to do so. The ones that don't have to, and then it's the ones that choose to do so that are kind of in the mix and in the party or at the dance, so to speak, with your clients and the other firm's clients that are now pursuing these mass tort claims together. And then we all can have the conversations at that point, how can we combine resources and collaborate to then get the best outcomes. But, with the market share stuff, it's a little trickier because they're all part of the same policy. They're all kind of part of the same, ensuring the same claim, so to speak. So I think on those, it's really important, if possible, and it's not always going to be possible, but if possible, to try to get all the market members throughout our various clients to see if they can come to an agreed landing point and on how to pursue that kind of satisfies all their different priorities. Like you said, some are going to be more aggressive in nature, some may not be, and that can vary from claim to claim. That can vary from examiner to examiner. But really, just having those discussions up front amongst counsel and kind of kicking around the ideas and kind of coming to a consensus does help, and then having those communications back with the carrier and the clients.
Absolutely. And if you're a limited share, another thing to note, if you're an attorney on here and you get into that position, make sure that you offer to help. right? I think that's one thing. You see some situations where you're on steering committee, and next thing you know, you're doing 100% of the work, right? Which is pretty kind of expected. But then again, it's important to divvy up those duties, responsibilities. Even if, we've had some situations where we've been, in very, very low on the poll. And next thing you know, we're still going out there. We're taking some of the depositions. We're assisting where we can, right? We're helping prep the expert for their depo, whatever it could be, kind of figuring out those roles. And that's something where, be it the steering committee, leadership committee, wherever it is going to give assistance with, right? It's something that obviously wildfires we do a ton of. I think right now we're heavily involved with most every wildfire. I just recovered a pretty significant earthquake claim where we proved that fracking was causing earthquakes, which is kind of cool. And then obviously Kia Hyundai, right? That's something that, most of the firms out there are actively involved with. And it's fascinating because you're obviously representing your carriers, but you're also representing kind of in a way the group at whole, right? If you're taking forward your bellwether on a mass tort claim, you need to make sure it's done right. Everything has impacts. We need to work together because if we have somebody just shooting from the hip, not approaching it as a team, it has the possibility to kind of torpedo the entire case, especially in the mass tort context.
Not just the case, but the industry as a whole. And that's why, there's organizations that I know you're heavily involved with and our firm's heavily involved with. I think we'll step in and do briefs on some of these much larger issues and some of these much larger mass tort cases as well. And again, I think if we're not all working together, we're all kind of selling ourselves and in the subrogation world short, because like you said, it's one case, one decision can affect all of us, right? And especially in a very high profile case like that, when you're dealing with a mass tort case and we all bring something to the table, we all can assist. And so I couldn't agree with you more that it is frustrating when you have, just because you're a small share doesn't mean you get to sit back and do nothing. Sure. Does it make sense that the people who have the largest interests and the largest theoretically to gain from positive outcomes do more? Absolutely. But by not providing your feedback and what you may have, just because you have a small share doesn't mean that you don't have certain experiences and feedbacks with this type of claim that can't be helpful. And so again, we're all better when we're all working together, regardless of who's got the big piece of the pie this time and who doesn't, because all of that's going to wash itself out in the end.
Absolutely. And, one thing so I have a unique role where I recently started for some reinsurers. I'm basically parachute Subro counsel, which is just a really odd thing to say because that's very standard on the defense side, where when the reinsurer's exposures hit, they might parachute in defense counsel for a number of reasons, right? But we've recently come in with some of these seeding companies where they're using, Joe Schmo debt collector on a complex products case. And it's like, hold up, like that might not be the right call, especially on some of these claims that could impact, like we have these, claims involving product recalls, something else where guess what? We get a negative ruling in one state that could have impact, be it claims against Amazon, these claims against the recalls on the ranges. It's a lot of this stuff where anything that can happen on a single case could have an impact on the whole industry. That's why it's so important. And this may sound self-serving. Firms like yours, firms like MWL, I mean, we know what we're doing. We've all been doing this for a very long time. We have great attorneys. But then again, sometimes I've seen situations where a limited share participant in the market share, they decide they're going to use some firm that offered to do it for, 10%. And then you realize, well, what else do they do? Well, they do UIM work. They're uninsured motorists, 99%. And they do the collections work. And they have 4 attorneys and 500 claims specialists under them. And then you realize, like, you know what? Maybe that's not the right call. So I guess I'd encourage any client, any carrier out there, that be selective on who you work with, right? You're talking to 2 very good firms here that do a lot of this. But just because you say you know what you're doing doesn't necessarily mean that you have the bandwidth to do so. So I would always say, make sure, and I was tell all my clients, you're not always going to choose MWL. You're not always going to choose your team over at Butler. But make sure you're asking the right questions because this stuff does get complex. And there is a place where the firms need to work together. We can't just have some collections vendor out there on the back end that's, has no idea what's going on, has never heard of the term market share or mass tort. Just an important thing to note. I won't dwell on that because it is very self-serving sounding, but still, I think it's a very important factor.
Well, I think it is important. And again, as we get in this world of collaboration, working with firms like ours, we're used to working in this context together. So you're maximizing what you as a market or as a group of subrogating insurers can do. If you're not going to work with the firms that traditionally do this, and again, I've seen it, you've seen it, you're probably going to be working with a firm that's going to be sitting in the back. And that probably isn't going to be, it isn't going to be very helpful. It's just not. And again, from the client perspective, I'm not sure what added value you're getting in those cases. So certainly working with a group of folks who are used to handling these types of claims, who are well-versed in these types of claims, are also going to be well-versed with working with one another in these types of claims and how to maximize all of our resources into maximizing the recovery.
And there's additional risk on that for mass torts in that there's plenty of scenarios where if you have a limited place in there, you're not on the steering committee, you're not on leadership, the class isn't certified, so it's not a true class action, it's just an MDL. There's scenarios where defendant will start picking apart the parties and they'll just go to those with a higher share, resolve with them, knowing full well that those with the more limited stake, they probably aren't going to be in a position to try that case. And, that's kind of where it gets a bit scary and why it's so important for that collaboration. Now, aside from the collaboration on be it mass torts or market share, I mean, is there anything else that you think is, worth noting today?
No, I just think, for the most part as an industry, I think subrogation through firms like ours, through professional organizations, has developed a fantastic collaborative environment that I think it has served carriers well. And I don't see that changing from what I've seen. And I think it's only going to become more prominent and prevalent because of these contexts we've discussed today, the market shares, the mass torts. These are not contexts that are going away. These will continue to be there. There's always going to be, like you said, there's going to be mass torts. There's going to be multi-district litigation. I can pretty much, unless something changes dramatically soon, I think there's no reason to believe that the commercial industrial market shares are going to change at all in the way those risks are being insured. So I just think that, but we've, again, we see your firm at the organizations, at the conventions, the presentations. Likewise, you see, our folks doing the same thing. We've been working together for a while, and there's other firms too, not certainly to suggest that we're the only two firms out there, but you know who those firms are. They're around, they're reputable, they know what they're doing. And again, I think we've all been working together for so long now that it's been a pleasure. And it's been I think something that really has benefited clients as a whole, because when someone, if one of the major players stopped doing that, it would obviously create an impediment to moving these claims forward. And again, moving the industry forward.
And one of the reasons it was so important for me to get us both together, and I have you doing a podcast. We also recently had Chris Kidball, who has a Claims Hunters podcast, that joined me. I think it's important just to note that the goal here is to help expand everybody in the industry's knowledge. Because in Subro, we're all in it together. We're in a unique place. I think that my partner, Gary Wicker, once had a presentation, Subro, the red-haired stepchild, or whatever it was, redheaded stepchild. And it was talking a bit about, why Subro is so different. I mean, we are plaintiffs' attorneys for the insurance industry, which is unique, right? People, I speak at CLM in some kind of defense-oriented, tie-dye recently did as well. And we're talking about that. And it's like, hey, I tell them, I'm a plaintiff's attorney, right? And I see head shaking. People are starting to get up to leave. And it's like, no, but it's for who I believe to be the good guys. A lot of us have that mindset. And it's so important that we work together to convey that, right? Because we are no longer, I talked to Karen Siebert on another podcast, and we were talking about how Subro has changed over the last 30 years. And she was saying, years ago, some partners of my firm that have been doing this for 30, 35 years, they're saying, yeah, back in the day, people didn't even know what subrogation was. You talk to the C-suite, and they may have heard of that word before, but they never thought about it. People would say that subrogation is where your career goes to die. Back then, it was down in the basement behind the water heaters. They had the Subro department. That's changed, right? Now it's frankly, this is the only industry I could ever want. If I wasn't doing this, Aaron, I'd probably have a big sign on the side of the roads. Ashton Kirsch, bust your neck, I'll get you a check. Not really, but that's the mindset that we have to have. We need to think like plaintiffs' attorneys. We need to be nimble. We need to be able to work together. Our goal is to create narratives, build stories, make liability exist. I think it's just a fascinating thing that once we get more people kind of into that Subro Sense, right? Like how I used that there, into that Subro mindset, really we can make the industry more enticing, get more talent into it. And those who are already in the industry, help them kind of excel, do better, and frankly, move up in their careers. I just spoke, it was a few days ago, did a webinar on negotiations for the NASP, was it the Young Leadership Group or Young Executives? And I was talking a lot about that, saying, you are in such a cool place right now. Subrogation is getting huge attention. I've had a bunch of clients, they were claims managers, and they took lateral moves to other companies because they just wanted to get into subrogation. So it's a really nice place to be at. So I encourage everybody, all audience members, listening to these podcasts, find other podcasts, read books, right? Get out there and learn more about subrogation, because that is how we're going to make the industry stronger. That's how we're going to be able to work together. And that's how we're going to be able to do better at our jobs.
That's a great point.
And that's really all I have. Just as a, reminding everyone, check out my podcast, the Subrogation Support Network podcast. I'm available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, pretty much anywhere where podcasts can be found, or at our website, mwl-law.com. Aaron, tell us where we can find yours.
Yeah, absolutely. Subro Sense, Butler's podcast for subrogation professionals, is available likewise, Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio, pretty much everywhere you download your podcasts from. You can visit us at www.butler.legal. And we encourage, and like you said, follow us, follow you, follow the industry. There's a lot of great. 5 years ago, there wasn't much, 6 years ago, but now there are so many great podcasts and just different avenues and information out there on Subro. A lot of momentum, and it's great to see. But Ashton, thanks so much for setting this up. I really appreciate it.
Of course. Well, you can just see it from the traffic, right? So I used to make jokes during my first few podcasts. I'm like, my dozens of audience members. And then I started looking, and somebody's like, there's hundreds of people. And then, there's been 1,000, more than 1,000, 2,000 uploads on this one. And I'm like, all right, that's kind of cool. So, we can just see, right, just from the sheer number of people listening to this content, that it's changing, right? That people are paying attention. No, I appreciate all that you do, Aaron. I look forward to seeing you at some conferences coming up, share a beer together, watch some football, go Packers, and go from there. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Sounds great. Thanks, Ashton.
All right. Everybody, audience of both podcasts, Subro Sense, Subrogation Support Network, thank you all so much. This is Ashton Kirsch and Aaron Jacobs signing off from this episode of the Subrogation Support Network podcast. Until next time.